Good evening, friends and neighbors. Welcome to Town Hall. Welcome to our residents who are watching on closed circuit TV and online. We have a great program tonight as we have an expert in the house. And we'll learn more about her in a few minutes. But first, let me thank our greeters this evening, Jean Ekimoto and Joy Forgash. Thank you too to our technical crew, Daryl Chan, Stephen Walker, Casey Jones, and Steve Whitford. Thank you so much. We have birthday celebrants to greet tonight. Let's say happy birthday to Ruth Yamamoto. I think she's probably watching on TV. And happy birthday also to Rose Kwok. She's here. Happy birthday to Jackie Berdios. That's me. Happy birthday to me. Make sure you greet those who are not here tonight when you see them, okay? We have also a new resident this evening, and Beverly Martin will introduce our new resident.
Good evening. Am I close enough? Okay. It's my pleasure to introduce Bill Chow. He was born in China, and his family escaped the communist China when he was 7 months old. They spent 2 years in Hong Kong, and then 7 years in Japan, and that's where he learned to speak English. They moved to the U.S. when he was 10 years old and in the 6th grade. Later, he went to Los Angeles City College and then UCLA. As he Yay! As he proudly displays on his license plate, he was in the Army during the Vietnam era. Since then, he's worked for Delta Airlines for 34 years. He is the brother-in-law of our own, as he married her younger sister, who sadly passed away in 2011. He moved to Atherton from Temple City, where he sold his 3-bedroom home that he had lived in for 43 years. He has a son in Culver City and a daughter in Brooklyn, New York. His daughter came out to help him downsize and get ready for the move 1 week before he actually moved in. He's been here for 4 months. He likes to read, listen to books online, and ride his bicycle around the block. Yes. I'll get there. Yes, he brought his bicycle with him. He keeps in good physical condition by walking, biking, swimming with Helen, and playing ping pong. Again, after 25 years of picking it back up. He and Helen enjoy finding new Chinese restaurants in the area, and he also enjoys our social hours. He's known about Atherton for many years and has been encouraged many times by Helen to move in. His kids are happy that he is here. Let's welcome Bill Chow.
Okay, now let's meet our guest tonight. Yvonne Savio grew up on a 3-quarter hillside lot in Pasadena, growing year-round fruits and vegetables and flowers with lots of manure and compost and making do before it was called recycling or repurposing. She knows what harvested at the perfect moment of ripeness means and enjoys enabling others to enjoy the benefits of growing your own. For 36 years, she worked for the University of California, conferring with statewide vegetable, fruit, and ornamental specialists, then revitalizing the Los Angeles County Master Gardener Volunteer Program. Whew, that's long. Teaching 1,150 master gardeners who then served 1.3 million county residents. In 2015, she initiated her website, www.gardeninginla.net, where she blogs every other week or so about what's actually happening in her Pasadena garden. She posts intriguing gardening news articles and invites everyone to submit gardening events and job opportunities open to the public. Please welcome the plant whisperer, Yvonne Savio.
Thank you, Jackie. I've never been called the plant whisperer. That's exciting. So thank you very much for adding another phrase to what I'm referred to. I certainly have always loved talking gardening, and so anytime that there is somebody who has a question or a wonderment about why something working or why it's not working when they followed all the instructions, then that's where I come in and give an explanation as best I can, and then I always end it by saying, or I made something up. But always with the experience of playing around with so many plants. And as I responded to master gardeners who would be so impressed with how much I knew, as they put it, I would say that's because I have killed more plants than you ever knew existed. Because the killing is also the learning. It gives you that excuse to figure out, why did that work, but this didn't work, and maybe this other option will work. So it's playing with your plants, and it's just having a fun time. And sometimes the magic works, and sometimes it doesn't. So as Jackie had said, in 2015, I started my own website because I had retired from the university. And this is it at the top of the flyer. Gardening in LA, and then the next line down, which, and as it is on the screen here, gardeninginla@gmail.com is the email. So if you, after tonight, if there's something that you don't quite remember, or what was it she said anyway about that, then just go ahead and email me and tell me that you were here, and I'll make something up. The next line down here where it has the date of 10/11/21, container gardening, that's when I had done the blog that is on the website, and so you can look it up. So in that sense, you can review this all on your own just by looking at that time. And if you type in, into your browser, the address that's there, that will take you right to the article. The other thing that's helpful on my website is on the home page, I have maybe 10 or more articles of each season, so to speak. We're moving into fall, and then we will winter and spring and summer, so that there are some of the major topics that I have dealt with in the blogs. Those I've itemized on that frontispiece page, and consequently, you may find some things there rather than utilizing the search bar. So today we're going to be doing container gardening. Jackie tells me that many of you have space at least for a couple of containers, or you may have a larger space of actual in-the-ground kind of gardening that you're able to do. So hopefully the tips that I'm going to be giving to you and that I've itemized on the paper there, you won't have to be so concerned about trying to remember everything or make notes. You'll have it right there. And then, of course, you can review it online. So, the first thing that you'll see here you see the size of this container, the tallness and the width and the depth, as opposed to this one, which is a terracotta pot, and it has its own legs. So there's the ability to have the air go underneath the pot. And then, of course, even smaller pots, maybe a 6-inch pot. And the whole point with this photo is to alert you that you need to match the plant and its root system with the container that you're utilizing. So for example, on this one, this pot is about 5 or 6 inches deep, and it has a couple of strawberry plants in there. Now this is fine for the strawberry because the roots won't go much deeper, even if you planted it in a deeper container, because genetically that's what its roots do. It goes about 5, 6 inches. However, the difficulty with this pot is that it is only that deep. So consequently, these plants cannot go any further in search of moisture or fertilizer, just the stability that is in the soil. And consequently, they're going to easily fill their roots in this container very quickly. And what that means is that it will not have access to the food or the water, and the space will be so limited that it will be necessary to water that probably every other day. And during the summer, it may be every day, twice a day. So then it gets to be a real commitment on your part that you have to deal with this plant just to keep it alive, much less thriving, okay? To give you the food or the flowers that you really are growing that plant for. So a good example of an appropriate pot is for this tomato plant, because this is about 2 feet tall, 2 feet wide, and 2 feet deep. Now, what are called patio tomatoes are shorter and with smaller root systems. But a cherry tomato could go up 6 feet here. And consequently, it could be almost that in the root ball. So it's always good to match the plant and how big it's going to be and how big the root system is going to be in order to choose the pot for it. And generally, you will always want to have a container that is taller than wider, because you're dealing with gravity here at being able to pull down the water that comes in at the top all the way to the bottom. And that's why these smaller pots are going to dry out more quickly. And consequently, you're going to have to pay closer attention to more watering. So, why or why not should you grow something in a container? The advantages are that in a patio or balcony or a fence or steps, anywhere where there is a light level that matches what the plant needs. You can move containers either during the season or, if it's too hot in the summer, then you can move it to another space, and it won't be such a hardship on you to take care of that container. You can also just move them for your own enjoyment, like when they're in bloom, or when it's actually blueberries or orchids, creating a mix especially for them. Because, of course, orchids, if those of you who have bought all the multitude of orchids from Trader Joe's or somewhere, sometimes they're big pieces of bark, and other times they're that sphagnum moss. And I've always been wondering, well, how do I know which one's which, and what should I mix it with? So it is a specialized mix that is for those particular plants. And of course, blueberries need to be very acidic soil. So it's not like you can create a whole, well, you could, but it would be tremendously expensive and laborful to create a whole bed just for blueberries, as opposed to a container that you can make it very acidic. So some of the disadvantages are that you've got a trapped plant. Those roots are restricted. They can't go anywhere in search of water or fertilizer. They are sensitive to the weather. You know, whatever the condition is, that container is going to be in the middle of it all. They do need frequent irrigation and fertilization, and they do need frequent root pruning and repotting, just because, like the example I gave with those strawberries, that it's going to fill the container, so it needs to have the roots chopped back a bit and new soil added. So this is going to be a yearly or maybe twice a year activity that you're going to have to be doing, that if you want your plants to look really nice. So what kind of containers? You saw that car, didn't you? Drainage holes are the whole thing about container plants. Unless you have a really pretty container and a really pretty plant, and you want to put them together, which is here. Now this little rose is in a container, like one of those plastic things that you get when you buy the plant, but they wanted to have a really nice pot at their front door. But this has no hole in it, and they don't want to put a hole in it because then the water would come out and it would stain the tile. So the way you do that is you plant the pot in a pot. So this one, you would have maybe a 6 or even a 10-inch pot that the plant is in, and then you put it in the container. However, you put more sphagnum moss or bark or potting mix in between all that, so that when you water the plant, it will go into the big pot, and every once in a while you will have to tip it and spill out the excess water, because it will spoil at the bottom of that pot. And you can purchase what's called horticultural charcoal, little bags of it, that you put at the bottom of these closed containers. And what that does is the water that goes down into that section, it literally purifies the water. It's like if you have one of those water purifiers that you attach onto your kitchen sink faucet. Chances are, or one kind of it, is that it's a charcoal filter. Well, that's what you're doing with this as well. You're just assuring that that water that's sitting in there for perhaps a month is going to be purified. Size is the whole thing, and like I said earlier, bigger is better. However, you want it taller than wider, so that it doesn't have all that possibility for evaporation, which means you have to water it more frequently. And you want it deeper than wider. Material and color, like this is a glazed pot, which means it's not going to evaporate. The clay pots are going to evaporate very easily, but what that means is you get a good passage of water through there that does evaporate. And of course, darker colors will absorb the heat during the summer, and lighter colors won't. And hanging baskets can be really nice, certainly fun, like all these teapots here. But again, you either have to put a hole in the bottom so it drains, or dump them every once in a while. There you go. The automatic, perfect way to do it. And of course, even these crocodile things that are plastic, you just have to find the perfect plant. In this case, all these geraniums are doing quite well. And then there's this little car with its garden that it takes with it. So my succulent collection, this is what it looks like after about 5 years of overgrowth, and I repot everything, and I have a great time matching the textures of the pot, the colors of the pot, the patterning of the pot, the size of the pot, with the same qualities in those plants. So, having something really filigreed like this and a color is going to be something completely different than I use for this little plant or this one. So it gets to be a real fun exercise just to do some of that matching. How much sun should I give my container garden? It really depends what you are planting, what you're growing there. If it's just going to be foliage, no blossoms, and no fruit to it, then you can do fine with about 6 hours of sun a day. If you're having flowers and fruit, it's bumping up to 8 or more hours a day, because you're asking that plant to do a whole bunch more than just grow green stuff, right? You're asking it to put out blossoms, you're asking it to be pollinated and then develop the flowers and the fruit on there. So it's a lot more time, length of time, as well as the amount of sunlight that you're giving them. And bright shade is pretty much equal in terms of sun to houseplants. You have your begonias that like a little bit of sun throughout the day, especially filtered, and that would be the same thing in a house plant that has access right to a window. Soil mix can be a real issue. There are so many brands out there. And what I really like is this kind of a mix that is very equal particles. It's not a mulch which has more bark slivers in it. But when you are going to be having a container that you're growing plants, or if you're starting seeds, you want to have the texture of that mix to be an equal little bits and pieces to it. And you don't want to use the dirt from a garden in your container, because for a lot of reasons, but especially because of the possible disease spores that are in the dirt. And weed seeds will also always be there, and it's just too heavy for the roots of the plants that you're going to be growing in there. Certainly, you can put the same kinds of plants into the soil or into a container, but it's going to be a lot more lush in the container if you're using potting mix as opposed to that same dirt that you're planting it in outside of the container. So you do want to use a high-quality, sterilized, soil-less mix of organic ingredients, because that's going to give the vitality to the mix. And when you put your mix in there and then you plant your plant, you want to have about an inch gap between the mix and the top of the container, because that's what you're going to be filling with water. And then it's going to go down into the potting mix and out the bottom, and then you're going to water it a second and a third time when you've just transplanted a plant, just to make sure that all that potting mix gets thoroughly saturated. So, some veggies. Certainly tomatoes. This is what's called a grow box that doesn't have any soil in it, and it has the spout here where you pour the water, and it's more of a hydroponic system. It has the nutrition in the liquid that you pour down into it. Lemongrass loves to be crowded in a container. This is fun to understand, to learn about many plants, that sometimes they will bloom better or produce better when they're crowded in their container, as opposed to, you would think, having a nice open space where their roots could go anywhere in that pot. It doesn't work that way with some plants. They want to be crowded. This is called an 8-inch pea plant. That's its name, is 8-inch, because this is a 6-inch pot, and then it gets to be a little bit larger for the plant itself, and it actually comes up with probably 8 pea pods. It doesn't really, it's more than that. Here is a box that has just been put onto the lawn, and the roots just will grow right down into that. So it's a very easy process, because you don't have to be taking out the lawn. It's going to mulch right there. Here's an example of a plant that loves it hot and dry. This is a leek plant, and it's just in a one of the community gardens has edged its pot with these concrete building blocks, and it just put the leek right into it, and it's doing just fine. This is a watering system that is so clever. It's got that big, the water trough for horses and things down here. It's got a pump which takes the water all the way to the top, and then all of these rain gutters are angled each direction, so the water gradually works its way all the way down. Each tray is a different kind of lettuce, and then at the bottom it goes back down into the reservoir and gets repumped up. Fruit trees, fruit bushes, and ornamental trees that you can put in containers. This is a great example of a construction in this community garden. They got funding to put in that padding that you use for like yoga classes, and they put the covering over the top of it, and consequently this grape bush no longer put out grapes. It had been in the direct sun. Now it doesn't get any direct sun, so it will not produce what they had depended on before then. So this is a change in that what the plant needed in order for the amount of sun that it to grow. So it became a very nice ornamental plant. but no grapes. This is an example of two layers. This is a kumquat tree, and then its roots are primarily down at the bottom of the container, and right at the top edge of the container are little bunches of little succulents. Now the succulents, the roots of those only go about 5-6 inches deep. So they are at the top part of the plant, of the pot, and the tree is at the bottom half of the pot. So they're not competing with each other for the amount of fertilizer or water, as long as you can provide a really big pot. And this is more like a 25-gallon container. Now this one, this ornamental, you'll see there's a little soaker hose piece going down here. That's the only reason that this plant can exist in this pot, because it is so squished for its roots, but because it has the water going very frequently, timing, the plant looks fine. So you can really stretch things to some extent if you take into consideration what the plant is needing. So flowers that you can put into containers, certainly begonias, geranium, even little bulbs, hydrangeas. This is ornamental, what's it called? Moss rose is what it's called, but it's a little succulent. And then this guy's hair. So how many plants can I put in a pot? And I gave you the example of the kumquat with the succulents. This is the artichoke with herbs around it. And again, it's the same thing. The artichoke, which can go maybe 15 years, those roots are primarily at the bottom half of the pot. And all of these different kind of like oregano and basils, all of those herbs are maybe 6 inches deep. So they can live together just fine. Should I use seeds or transplants? You really want to use seeds that germinate and grow quickly, because in the container you've kind of got you're immediately aware of it. So if you have to wait too long for something to happen, you kind of, that's not such a good feeling. Transplants, you do want to, for those kinds of things that do take a while to get to the point where they are going to be pretty, are things like eggplant, pepper, tomato, and most flowers. The transplants are going to spend more time growing up to the point where would have been of interest for you to really look at them. And that's why I have both here. This is an example. I bought a 6-pack of lettuce. I planted it so I could start harvesting those leaves immediately. But I also put in the seeds of lettuce so that after several weeks of harvesting these leaf by leaf, then the seeds will have grown large enough that I can transplant those plants and start getting more lettuce off of those plants. So the high yield vegetables are going to be beans, beets, broccoli, carrots, lettuces, peppers, radishes, squashes, and tomatoes. So all of these guys down here, these are the ones that are good choices because you'll get so much food out of them for the space it takes in a container. Watering can get to be a thing. The larger, deeper container does moderate the soil temperature, and the double potting moderates it even more. which is from that first slide, the size of the container matching the plants, it's going to determine how frequently you have to water and how much. The best gauge for whether something needs water or not is your index finger. If you stick that in and the whole finger feels moist, then don't water. If it is somewhat dry, especially down toward the tip, then it probably needs water, especially if it's going to, not so much now as we go into the cool season, but definitely in late spring and summer. You want to water slowly because you really want to get it into the potting mix itself. And if it runs down the side and out the bottom, you know that that potting mix has dried sufficiently so that the water just works its way around it. And all you have to do in that case is just rough up the surface a little bit and water it so that the whole interior portion of the potting mix will be saturated again. And whether or not you use a drip pan underneath, during the summer you do want to do that because the water goes through the container into the drip pan, and then it will gradually reabsorb that, and consequently you're making a better utilization of the effectiveness of the water that you're paying for. But winter, you know, it used to be, when we used to have lots of rain all winter long, that you wouldn't use a drip pan. But with our droughty times, and with the expensiveness that water is getting to be, I keep drip pans underneath. I just make sure that I'm dumping them once a week if there is still something there. But I want to be able to have all that water utilized rather than running out the pot. Fertilizer, the major ones are nitrogen, which is green stuff, phosphorus, which is strong roots, and potassium, which is healthy growth overall, and the blossoms and the fruit. You do want a lot of trace minerals in there. You don't just want the big NPK ones. Organic fertilizers include fish emulsion, which is the stinky one, and there are less stinky ones out now. Seaweed kelp, blood meal, and bone meal. And I recommend using a quarter strength every other time you water. And I've even gotten to the point where I do an eighth of a strength every time I water, just because I never quite remember which batch of plants I watered. So the easier is just do a little bit every time or every other time. And you don't want to use lots of fertilizer because that will end up with that white chalkiness on your containers. And that just means that the water evaporated and it left the fertilizer. So just keep washing it, watering it, and it will wash itself out. So that's the how to do it and all that. This is the fun part. Some containers that you may not have considered. Now, many of you are my age and older, and so you may remember when coffee came in 5-gallon cans. So that's what this person has done. They've collected them, they've cleaned them, they've painted them, and they've planted them and in a sculpture on the wall. Of course, our coffee canister, the lighting above your dining table, trunks of a tree that split, a large decor set, And here's my little swan with the little baby succulents in there. A bathtub. It already has a drain. This is a wicker basket for this batch of herbs. And the master gardener that had these, of course, she wore out so many wicker baskets because it all got wet and just rotted away. So before she figured out that she lined it with plastic right up to the rim here and put a couple of drainage holes in the bottom of the plastic so it would drain, but also so that it would not really get in touch with the wicker, and consequently the container would last much longer. A bureau, a big huge truck tires, and of course this is what was available maybe 20 years ago at Home Depot when they were first invented to build up a wall that had the slots for you to be able to plant in there. More design of pots and lumber, an old toolbox. For those of you who love crocheting and knitting, that's what to do with them. All the succulents love having all that breathing space. And of course, this really old, beautiful wheelbarrow. Absolutely fun stuff. I particularly like my ladybug up here. Shoes. And of course, everybody's fantasy of what a container garden should be. This is not my garden. This is somewhere in Italy, I think. And that's it. Any questions? Yes. Once every 35 years. I have no idea. But the whole point is that it's basically permanent because it is clarifying that water. So, but remember, you do want to tilt that pot maybe once a month or so just to get the excess water that is down there out of the pot so that it's not literally swimming. Yeah.
Hang on.
Oh, right. Okay.
Do you remember the slide about how much sun?
Right.
And you had a wheel with 12 dividers in it with different succulents
Right.
in it. Do you remember, if it was yours, do you remember what's the source of those dividers? They look pretty neat. It looks like
Oh,
a
well,
clock.
it was a wagon wheel. Is that what your question was?
Yeah, maybe,
Yeah. And there was a time at which, especially with school gardens, they were called pizza gardens because you would just make sections. You know, this would be where the wheat was, this is where the tomato was, this is where the green pepper was. And then, of course, the sausage didn't happen and the bacon did not happen. But it was just, it started out being an actual physical thing like a wagon wheel. But the pizza garden or a butterfly garden, you know, having the wings and each of the little design patterns would be a different plant, and the kids would be determining all that. So it would be part of the artistry in the garden as well. And that was always one of the the tremendous things about school gardening is that you teach every academic subject in the garden. So it just made it an absolutely universal kind of learning experience for the kids. And because it was all hands-on, they were just entranced with it. You know, the teachers, when the kids would come in after having been in the garden, the kids would be all excited and raring to go. But before they were out in the garden, they were just grumpy and just wanting to get out there. So it was certainly one of those perfect activities for kids and gardens. Yes?
I see all your flowers are outdoors, in the garden, whatever. How about indoor plants? We have a screened-in patio. How well can how can I plant? What kinds of plants can I put there? Because I have the screen. There's no pollination, there are no bugs.
Sure. It's really anything like what would be a low light needing plant, like begonias. House plants generally will do fine out there. So whether or not they have any color to them, like I have several plants that the coloration is in the foliage. It's a variegation, and through the year, depending on if it gets a little bit of sun or a whole lot of sun, just as it's moving under my oak tree, the colors will intensify. Sometimes it's a matter of the temperature, and sometimes it's a matter of the length of time that the sun is out, like summer as opposed to winter. Those two main elements are the things that you will find that the variegated kinds of foliage will change according to that. You know, sometimes when it's colder in the winter, they will get brilliant colors, or in the summer. So any of those, that way you can, just counting on a house plant and maybe utilizing the characteristic of the coloration of the foliage to be, or certainly the textures of foliage and all that. But certainly begonias are a good beginning for that. Yeah.
On the fertilizer, what's the difference between the blood meal and bone meal? I always want to ask that question.
Well, they have different chemistry to them, and so plants need both.
Can I use that one for the orchids?
No, you want to utilize more of an orchid food, that's labeled for that. The blood and bone are something that you would utilize mostly in an edible garden for the strength of the plants, and it's going to take a long time for that to break down.
Are they for the fruit or for the root? Or what is the benefit for those two?
It's just part of the nutrition of the fertilizer for the plant.
Okay, thank you.
That's, look it up. Google, what's the difference between blood meal and bone meal? And it will give you the chemistry on there that I can't. Yes.
Do you have a suggestion for how to protect yourself and the cactus if you're transplanting a really large cactus to a new pot?
The only thing I have attempted in dealing with cactus is lots of newspaper. Now, a really big one, I don't know. By lots of newspaper, I'll say 10 or 15 sheets wrapping around this thing, and then trying to get a balance and having maybe a cardboard under the plant part itself, like if it's a barrel or the longer shape, and then having my other hand under the pot
I would ask someone else to do it. I have a question. Earlier you mentioned that plants that produce fruits it's better to give them more sunlight. Do plants ever need rest and no sunlight?
Well, each one is different. You know, there are things that go dormant during the summer, which is one of the supposed or perceived disadvantages of utilizing native plants, because they shut down during the summer. They don't want to deal with having to strive to survive during all this, you know, tremendous heat and everything else. And so they will come alive more in the fall and through the winter, which is why now is the best time to plant native plants, because now the soil is still nice and warm. I mean, transplanting of anything, but specific to native plants, the soil is nice and warm, so the roots can get a good start to it. And then as it gets cooler and milder and it rains, then it's going to enable those plants to really start thriving. So by the time the heat comes in, well, sometimes March, as early as March, they are well established in there and going from that time. So, you know, fruit trees generally will be a winter dormancy, and that's when they rest. You really end up having to deal with plants on their bases. You know, when do they want to sleep, so that you're not continuing to water them and fertilize them so that they keep putting out green stuff and they're looking supposedly good to your eye, but in fact you're killing the plant because you're making it constantly run, you know, as if you didn't get any sleep for 3 months.
I was thinking about those gardening techniques where they raise plants indoors and they have lights on all the time, and the plants, I'm assuming, are continually producing all the time.
Right, and then they harvest them, and then they pull all that out and
Got
they
it.
put new plants in.
Got it.
They just need to take it to the point where it produces the fruit. They're not worried about perpetuating it and having a sustainable plant.
Oh, excellent.
You know, I mean, Alaska is great. You know, it's got 12 hours, 14 hours a day of brilliant sunshine and a little bit for the rest of the time. I mean, if you can read a newspaper, you know, at the depth of night up in Alaska, it can be doing some photosynthesis. So you get cabbages that are this big, you know. Yep. But it shuts down. I mean, it's...
Okay. You know, as I drive around Southern California, you see these tall palm trees that are like 80, 100 feet high. Do they have root systems equal to that height?
No, they don't. But it is interesting that the palms, because of the swaying and through the storms that we have had, they have held on. So, you know, you wouldn't think, if you look at it, that it would have much strength, but in fact it does.
Do you have some favorite flower seeds that are really easy? My first flowers were marigolds and cosmos. I guess it's the one seed in the mix that grew, and it produces beautiful orange flowers. The
Yeah.
leaves look like marigolds, but anyway,
Right.
anything else that
Well, you're along with my husband. His first gift from his gardening parents was a little plot, and he dumped the whole container in. And of course, his parents said, no, that's not the way you do it right. And then 3 months later, the neighborhood is coming by to see his plot because all those marigolds went crazy and looked beautiful. And the parents kind of were there a little embarrassed that he had done well. So marigolds definitely are a good thing. Um, you know, at this time of year, absolutely go for wildflowers. Um, you know, and water it in, and poppies, California poppies. There's so many of them. It's just, I always hesitate, you know, answering a question like my favorites, because it just, whatever blooms is my favorite, you know, whatever comes up. So, and not to worry about it, you know, when it doesn't germinate. And see what you can find out what will encourage it. You know, do you weed stuff first, or do you just throw the seed out there and then pick the weeds out later, or what? It just, it's just try something, you know. Okay.
Okay, well, let's give a hand once more to Yvonne Savio. That was a very nice educational presentation. Thank you so very much. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that's it for tonight. Thank you for coming, and enjoy your evening.